You are now entering Nick and Mello's hyperspace.
I'm Nick, and I think my favorite scene from The Rise of Skywalker was Ben Solo's redemption when he faced his father for the last time.
And I'm Carmelo. And my favorite scene is when Harrison Ford returns as Han Solo and he talks to Kylo Ren. Nick and I we are cosmically connected.
I had a feeling that would be the same.
My goodness.
In our journeys through hyperspace, we examine anything and everything Star Wars from the point of view of two lifelong fans, one young, one old, who came together through the will of the Force. And in today's episode, given our intro, we are going to discuss The Rise of Skywalker, because for those of you that don't know, it is 5 years now since that movie came out. And to me, that blew my mind because it does not feel 5 years ago. And that is currently, as the time of this recording, the last Star Wars movie we've had in theaters. So hopefully that changes in the next couple of years. But right now, that's the last one we have to go on. So
that's very true. That's very true. It's actually one of the few films that I have
a T-shirt of
3 Rise of Skywalker T-shirts.
I know. I've noticed.
I just became obsessed. I started buying them online. Like sometimes we do an episode, and I'm like, "What am I gonna wear?"
And it's that one.
I have nothing to wear for that episode. Not with this one.
That's
I
right.
was sad. I was sad for this one. It's really interesting because I teach my Star Wars class. I see this film very, very, very frequently. But it was fun seeing it not with my class eyes, but thinking about the podcast. And one of the things that I sort of want to start with is this whole notion of expectations. That when we, especially with something like the Skywalker saga, this is the last film in the series. All of us had all sorts of expectations about it. And I think part of the issue with this film is that every single fan came with a battery of expectations about the film. Is it a perfect film? Of course it is. But it's really interesting seeing it with different eyes now, 5 years later, and finding lots of really wonderful things that I sort of saw before, but didn't appreciate as much when I saw it when I was 2019.
I echo that sentiment because I think if we would have done this a year after this, the movie was released, I might have had a different opinion. I have always said this is my least favorite of the sequel trilogy. I still think it's my least favorite. There's a lot of things I love about this movie, and I think as time has gone on, I've grown to appreciate it more. I still don't love all the decisions that ended up happening because, like you said, we have our own expectations, but I can appreciate some of the endings for some of our characters and some of the themes that I think are important to all of Star Wars that are carried over in this movie and play a big part of this movie.
You mentioned, if we had done this a year after the movie, my response is I would not have done an episode on Rise of Skywalker a year after. I would not have been interested in doing it. And now I am, when you mentioned this, I was like, yeah, that would be really, really, really interesting. My least favorite remains Attack of the Clones. I find that a very clunky film.
What about?
I like this one better than Attack.
What about of the sequel trilogy? Is this? Where would you put it in the?
It would be my third.
Your third.
It would be my third.
Yeah.
It's Last Jedi, Force Awakens, Rise of Skywalker.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually mine too.
We shouldn't be in a podcast.
I don't know.
We're just like
we're very boring.
Things.
There's no tension really between us ever.
No, but they're just all these. There are things. There's something that I caught this time. This is a tiny little thing, but I think it's a fun thing. The very first thing that 3PO says in New Hope is, "Did you hear that?"
Mm.
And the last thing that he says in Rise of Skywalker is, "Did you hear that?"
Oh.
When Rey's X-wing lands in the planet at the very end of the film, and I love these little wrap-ups. They're narratively inert, but they're just really adorable. Mm-hmm. They're just really adorable.
Yeah, I didn't realize that, but there's a lot of fun callbacks to the legacy of Star Wars and all the things that came before it. But why don't we talk? I guess we can just jump to the scene that we both loved so much. That I'll go first, but that whole sequence of the movie that's a really good lightsaber fight between Rey and Kylo Ren, and then Leia reaching out for the last time and her passing, and then this happening right after that. I forgot it all happened right then, and man, that was a rough 10 to 15 minutes. That was emotional. That was my favorite part of the movie. That whole sequence is my favorite part of the movie. Left me with a lot of feelings, a lot of different emotions. But that scene is one of my favorites in all of Star Wars. It's definitely top 5 for me. And it was a very shock in the theater. I remember I saw this movie multiple times in theaters, but I remember seeing that scene for the first time, like blown away that Harrison Ford would actually come back. I didn't expect that. And
I was not expecting that at all.
And the touching callback to The Force Awakens, it's almost verbatim what he said, It was just beautiful. And that's two of the best actors in all of Star Wars, and they just given the chance to just be emotional and heartfelt as possible, and they delivered really good.
I also liked in that sequence because it's the duel while Leia is in it, and then Han Solo sort of being added at the end. But there's also this really interesting interaction between Kylo Ren and Rey. Rey has just seen the dark side version of herself. Kylo Ren has just destroyed the pathway, the Sith pathway. So there are all of these things that are happening in here that are added to the sort of penance that are added in there in the story. And also the whole idea of Rey sort of giving life to Kylo Ren that gets then repeated when Kylo Ren gives life to Rey at the end of the film. So this whole idea of life and death is it's a circle that just keeps getting repeated in all of these different layers. And I found that really interesting. And I agree with you. It's very moving. It's very moving. And it helps that you have really good actors.
Yeah,
Harrison
very
Ford
good actors.
Is
a legend.
He can be a cranky old man, but boy, he's a very good actor. He's a very good actor. That scene is
it's beautiful.
It's just really beautiful.
It's so nice.
It's just really beautiful.
Something you mentioned in that sequence that I want to touch on, which I caught this time, and this is my social work brain getting into it, because I examine all kinds of emotions and feelings of people, but I really enjoyed when he just got stabbed and they're sitting together, and Rey says to him after she heals him that I did want to take your hand, but I wanted to take Ben's hand. And I like that very distinguishing fact that she made. Like, I would have taken your hand had you been the Ben that we know and the Ben that I see, not this monster that you are. And I think that speaks volumes to who Rey is. I think because there was a lot of, I don't know if you remember, but a lot of the early pre and post Force Awakens, or I guess post Force Awakens, when people were shipping those two characters, and then there was a lot of backlash about, like, it's not a healthy toxic relationship, and it's a toxic relationship. I don't know if that's the best thing for Rey, and back and forth debate. Right. But I thought that was a good distinction for the filmmakers and the writers to make.
And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, when she comes back to life at the end of the film, she calls him Ben.
She does.
And so there's that sort of, once again, this sort of wrap up of that scene, because this scene is repeated when Kylo Ren brings her back to life. And so these scenes have all these interesting connections in there. I love having a duel in water.
Yeah.
That was just really, really wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Yeah. So that was fun. What do you think of D-O?
Yeah, we have talked on this show for the whole length of it. We even did a whole episode on droids, but he is the one droid. I don't dislike him, but he's just there. I don't have an opinion, really.
Oh.
I like the design. I don't really know. I mean, honestly, and I don't want to say this as a bad thing, but I kind of forgot he was in the movie and what he really did. And I think, like I said, I think he's a fun design, and I love how Rey is very kind to Dio and very, welcoming of him to the group, but he didn't really do much for me, I guess you could say.
Interesting. The more I see the movie, the more I like it. And what was that novel, Shadow of the Sith?
I was going to talk about that later, but yes.
So it's really interesting watching this movie, sort of knowing that film and knowing that novel and knowing that story
Where
and
he came
knowing
from.
Ochi and that whole story. And so it sort of gives him a little more three-dimensionality
Mhm.
to him. I like the idea of a droid damaged, like emotionally
Yeah.
damaged, because it sort of continues this idea that droids are a type of life,
Mhm.
that they're not simply machines, or they're not just machines. And so I like that. I like that.
I,
We only meet them for one movie, and there's not much there, but
I like the
I
addition.
really
I
like it.
think that he kind of gives me the impression of like an abused animal, kind of fearful and like
Yeah.
hesitant to trust. And
No, thank you. No,
yeah,
thank you.
I think that's adorable. And yeah, that novel, I'm glad you brought it up because like I said earlier, if we had done this a year after the movie came out, I don't know if I would have been too crazy about it or positive about it like the Clone Wars did for the prequels for me. I think that novel did a big legwork in making this movie
I completely
make sense.
agree.
We understand Ray's parents' motivations more. We understand the
Yep.
things that brought them all to where they are. We understand not Leia, I'm sorry, Lando's position, why he ends up where he does, and like Luke.
Yep.
It's just a beautiful novel, and I would love to talk about it one day, maybe one day.
One day.
One day. That it really did a lot of lead work and made this movie better, in my opinion. And we get to learn more about Ochi and who he is, because in this character, he's
Yep.
just a throwaway. He's not, obviously, he's dead. Gives us context of where this story starts and kind of how it threads together through the rest of the series.
It's fun having the novel and learn about Ochi there. It's also fun to learn about Ochi through the comics.
He's become very popular in the comics.
And so it's really interesting to watch this movie after the fact, after he's been in comics, after he's been in that novel, because then everything sort of ties together in more interesting ways. I have not read it, but the novelization of this movie is quite a good book.
That's what I've heard too. I've not read it either.
And that I have not read any novelizations. It's one of my future projects is to go through all the novelizations, but I haven't. I have them. I own them,
But you haven't done
but
it.
haven't read them. But I've heard very good things about the novelization of this movie. I think because it's sort of beefing up
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the information that sort of passes a little too
Yeah.
quickly. And so that's really quite fun. I also love 3PO in this movie.
Oh, yes, that's another thing.
I he usually I find annoying for the most part.
This was his best movie for me.
This is one of my favorite 3PO movies.
Yeah, he has a lot of great funny lines, a lot of emotional moments
She
too. He had
does.
a lot to do in this movie.
Yes.
He felt like part of the team.
Yes.
A moment I forgot about was when they fall into the sand and Poe's like, Ray, Finn, and he's asking how everybody is. He says, I'm fine too, even though you didn't ask.
You haven't asked, but I'm fine as well, Master.
I still think, after watching this movie, that reminds me of your husband. I feel like that's a comment he would make if we were in that situation.
Oh, totally.
He's
Totally.
very much a 3PO.
I married a droid.
You did.
I married an emotional droid with a big heart.
That's C3PO. That's basically C3PO.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm.
Yeah, I appreciated.
This is not an insult. This is a compliment.
I appreciated his inclusion and his active willingness in this movie. It was great. I loved it.
Can we talk about Poe?
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of thoughts about Poe, but I want to hear yours.
I actually liked him a lot in this movie because the Poe in Last Jedi, it's a very impulsive and a very sort of like manly in a very sort of like classic way of just sort of saying it's my way or the highway. And I really like sort of the team discovering that he was a spice runner. I like very much the whole thing of now I'm a general because Leia's dead. What am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really nice to have elements of Poe that we had not seen before. Because in Force Awakens, he's just like
hotshot pilot,
the best pilot in the galaxy. In Last Jedi, he is
arrogant a little bit, and
he is a man after all. But in Rise of Skywalker, that's still there. But there are other things.
You see his growth.
I love that argument with Rey when he gets off the Millennium Falcon and Rey's like, "What have you done to the Falcon?" And Rey's like, "You're very difficult. You're very difficult." Which is sort of like a little bridge from the Poe from Last Jedi to the Poe that we're going to encounter in Rise of Skywalker. I really like that arc.
Yeah.
I really like that arc. Yeah.
And he had funny moments in this movie as well. And
Oh yeah,
and that's something that a lot of people, we're not going to be too negative on here, but a small complaint I have, and I think this is a positive of the movie, not a negative. It's more of a negative on the whole as the trilogy. Of course, everybody wishes that it would have been a little more planned out, a little more, some different decisions made. I can echo those sentiments, but one thing I loved is having all our heroes together, going on an adventure. Main three, and then of course the droids and Chewbacca.
Right.
I love that, and I wish we would have got more of that in this trilogy, having them interact more.
Okay.
Because I think that was a strong point of this movie that really worked for me, is having that fun bickering, having those quips, and them struggling together, and ultimately resolving all their problems together.
Right.
I wish we'd have gotten more of that in the earlier movies, because they were separated a lot.
Interesting. I remember when they announced this film, they said they're going to be together in an adventure. It never bothered me that they were not together in an adventure.
Okay.
I enjoyed what they did in Rise of Skywalker with the adventure, and that was really, really fun. But I was not disappointed in Force Awakens and in Last Jedi that they did not do that.
Yeah.
But that's just me. It never crossed my mind that was a problem.
I wouldn't say
I have other problems, but not
yeah,
that.
I would say I wasn't disappointed. I was more like, I didn't realize what we had with that cast of characters together. And the first two, I love those movies a lot. Those are some of my favorite Star Wars movies. And this movie, seeing them together, taking this trip they have together, made me be like, man, I wish we could have seen more of them together on screen, because they had good chemistry. Okay. I thought they were all fed off each other well, and they all had great dynamics. I just wish we would have had more screen time with those characters together, I guess you could say.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Not necessarily take away from those other movies, because I think those movies are great.
No.
But yeah, I just wish we'd have got more of them together. It would have been fun.
I caught something this time when Poe talks about Palpatine coming back. That one of the rebels, resistance fighters, said something about cloning.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting because 2019, this is when Mandalorian is coming out.
Right.
So there's already a conversation about cloning happening in there. And so it was fun to have that line in the film, knowing what we know now about seasons 1, 2, and 3 of The Mandalorian.
And the Bad Batch.
And the Bad Batch, right. And so it was really interesting. Once again, it's fun to watch these movies
in hindsight,
knowing what we know, what happens after it, because there are all of these connections, all of these really interesting connections. And the movie's still with things like that, which I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah.
The lightning skipping at the beginning, I thought was wonderful.
That was interesting. I had forgot about that.
Hyperspace skipping, is that what it's called?
Light speed skipping, I think, is what he says.
Light speed skipping.
Something. That's cool. And I think this movie, another thing I guess I should mention, this movie does things that I appreciate. Like I said earlier, there's decisions I don't like. There's a few things that this movie did that I love. That's one of them. I think that's a fun concept. The dyad between Rey and Kylo Ren, I think, is...
We got to talk about the dyad.
That is those two characters, for me, after watching this movie again, made me realize they're the best two characters in this entire trilogy. They're the heart and soul, and they're the most interesting part of the trilogy in my eyes. That dyad was cool, and I loved them kind of carrying it over from the previous movie and expanding on it and making it part of the lore, making it a new thing. And every time something new like that in Star Wars gets added, people complain like, we've never seen this before, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I loved it. I want to see new things. And I'm sure at one point we'll get a book, a comic, another movie, TV show that'll show two characters with a similar power. That's fine. But I enjoyed them doing something, taking a swing on something. And that, to me, was one of the things that worked in this movie, is that cat and mouse those two play with each other. And finding out where they are is really cool.
It's been interesting watching and rewatching this movie in regards to the dyad, because in Last Jedi, the narrative is that the connection was created by Snoke. But what happens in Rise of Skywalker is that connection remains. And so Palpatine is unaware of the dyad until they're at the Sith Temple in Exegol.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, I really like the narrative decision that the connection was deliberately created by Snoke,
Palpatine.
through Snoke by Palpatine,
Right.
but that they're unaware of the consequences of making that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so that now the dyad has this ability in the Force between Kylo and Rey that would not have existed if Palpatine through Snoke had not created that connection. I find that fascinating.
I agree.
Fascinating. This whole idea that Rey puts the lightsaber behind her and that Kylo is able to grab that.
Yeah, that's cool. That is really cool.
It's just so much fun. So much fun. And I love that notion that this was created sort of against them without their knowing, and now they're taking advantage of that connection.
Yeah.
They're using that connection for defeating Palpatine. Amazing.
That's another cool thing is throughout the whole Star Wars series and the Clone Wars, and we see Palpatine always has a plan, always has a backup, always can think ahead. Like you said, he didn't intentionally hope they would use it against him. He had no idea that this even existed, and he couldn't account for this, and they used it to their advantage. And that is beautiful storytelling in my eyes.
Yeah. That's that. It is one of my favorite concepts in this film.
Yeah.
It's just really what they do with what they created in Last Jedi, how they ran with it. I thought was really
fun,
really quite wonderful,
really fun,
really quite wonderful. So
let me ask you, because we mentioned it briefly, and I wanted to circle back to it. But the themes of this movie, and I mentioned how they echo throughout Star Wars. Are there any themes that you enjoyed that we've seen in other Star Wars stories that show up in this movie?
the big one for me is the continuation of legitimizing found families.
Yes.
That big, when fans got all upset about Rey being called Skywalker, to me that is consistent with the found family trope in Star Wars. Luke and Leia have been the parents of Rey. They have adopted her for what she was capable of and what she could do and for the wonderful person that she was. And so it makes absolutely perfect sense that at the end of the film she says, I'm a Skywalker. I am part of this family. I'm not biologically a Skywalker.
That's okay.
But I'm
a member.
Skywalker. Yeah. And in Star Wars, that's totally fine. So that's the other thing that that's a theme that I found really, really wonderful in the film.
I think that really, people the haters of the sequel trilogy like to say there wasn't a plan. But to me, it's consistent with her character through the other two movies of wanting to find belonging, wanting to find a family, a group of her own. We see her latch on to Han Solo. In the first one, we see her try to latch on to Luke. And in this movie, she's tempted by the dark side because Palpatine's her grandfather, and she has no other family, and she feels alone. So her fighting that resistance and that urge, and then picking her own destiny that's really Star Wars in my eyes. That's the most Star Wars thing. That's the most Star Wars thing I've ever heard of. So honestly,
I had not really thought about it through it the way you did with Han Solo and Luke, and then realizing the Palpatine connection. And that's really brilliant, Nick, because that's what she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what she's doing. It's really interesting, turning this just a little bit, the whole notion also with found family with Finn.
Mm-hmm.
Finn in this movie is obsessed with Rey because Finn makes the first human connection
with Rey
outside of the First Order with Rey.
A positive human connection.
So it's really, really interesting to see this, she is my sister. She is part of me. She is family. And so it was also beautiful not only to see the fan family with Rey, but also with Finn.
Mm-hmm.
Poe, not lots of people, and there's just a connection.
Yeah.
He's the extrovert of the family.
Definitely.
But Finn has an affinity with Rey because of how they met and because of how they develop as friends. And so it's just, I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah,
I thought it was really, really beautiful.
yeah,
Really, really
they
beautiful.
did good.
I am really hoping that the new Rey film will have a continuation of Finn as a force sensitive
I
person.
hope so. I think so.
I would really like to see that developed.
And that leads me to my favorite theme. Actually, was the
Okay.
there's a line I saw this going online a couple years ago after the movie that I didn't catch my first couple of times I watched it. There's a quote in episode 1 by Anakin who says, "Mom, the biggest thing you say is that nobody helps each other in this galaxy." And then in this movie, we literally see the galaxy rise up to fight oppression in a beautiful way.
Uh-huh.
And it really just
Mhm.
harkens back to that one line Anakin said, that throwaway line, felt like it really impactful, and it felt like it tied the saga together. And that fighting oppression and giving each other hope
Yep.
is literally Star Wars, and that's why I love it so much. And I thought that was a really nice, cool moment when Lando comes up with the cavalry, and it is amazing how many ships show up.
And I love that moment in the First Order when one of the officers says, "This is not a fleet. They're just
Yeah,
people.
it's just people.
They're just people."
Yeah, yeah,
um, I it's really funny because every time I watch this movie, I catch something new. There's always been this very long conversation about how the very first Star Wars is influenced by World War II movies,
hmm
and but they're always talking about very much the sort of like the dogfights and the battles and all of that. But one of the things that I noticed in this film that really harkens back to 1940s and early 1950s Hollywood war films is the whole idea that this is a good war,
mm
that we are doing the right thing.
mm
Um, and the speech that Poe gives when they're getting ready to go to Exegol, it's straight out of a Hollywood screenplay.
yeah,
About, we're fighting fascism, we're fighting the Japs. It's that same language. I hope that Japs is not a bad word. I have no idea. So English is my second language, guys. So if that is a bad word, my apology.
it's okay.
But it's really interesting how this film is very much about this war is a good war. What we're doing, what we're fighting for is righteous and is right.
Mhm.
And is right. We don't have, it's really interesting, we don't have the sort of nationalistic kind of, but we do have the language of this is a good war. We are fighting for a good reason.
Yeah,
We're not fighting because we are soldiers. We are fighting because we want to stop being
right.
soldiers. That's really Star.
That is really Star
That's
Wars.
really Star Wars.
This is
Very, very much
this is
so.
one of the most. I saw somebody describe this online one time. This is the most Star Warsy movie ever, honestly, because they go over the top with a lot of stuff. Like the fleet battle is the biggest we've ever seen. Palpatine's Force lightning is crazy.
Hey,
There's a lot of Force powers and a lot of just a lot of lore dumping. Like this is the most Star Warsy movie in my eyes. One of the most Star Warsy movies.
interesting.
It, it it's
I don't disagree. I just have never thought about that.
it's influenced by Star Wars. Obviously, I think more than any of the other movies. I think like they pull in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different things, and it works. My my thoughts have changed. Like I said earlier, I like this movie more, but there are some problems, and we won't be too negative. But are there anything that you didn't like about this movie that didn't quite work, or you wish was a little different?
It's hard to remember how I reacted originally, but the one thing I remember is that I wanted a little more on Leia as a master of Rey.
Mm,
I wanted just a scene where that is happening because every time that Rey is training, she's training by herself.
that's true.
And so that I remember thinking that sort of like, oh, I'm not I'm not in disagreement with this idea. I just want to see it play out a little more. rather than just sort of like now Leia takes over, and I'm like, and how did that happen?
Right.
I like the flashback of seeing Luke and Leia young training. And I love that scene because it tells you about the lightsaber and all of that stuff. That's nice. But I wanted something like that to connect to the idea that Leia was a master.
Yeah.
I still want Finn and Poe to have a fantastic kiss on screen. But that's just me and every other queer man.
I know, I want it too. I would love it. No, do it. They should have committed to it a little more.
And so but that to me, compared to the major thing, those are the Leia thing was the one thing that I remember thinking about while I was watching the film, that I was sort of like mentally scratching my head about.
Yeah, I agree.
I want a little more development on that.
And I think we're getting that in ancillary media. We're kind of seeing a little bit of that with her in some of the comics. So hopefully we continue to explore her part as a Jedi and where she ends up. But I agree. I think so.
One of the things that I think I'm discovering as I mentioned in this podcast before, I was a movie Star Wars fan for a very long time. And it was not until 2016, 2017 that I started sort of expanding my horizons beyond the movies. And the more I do this, the more I realize how limiting movies are.
They are.
Because of how much you can actually pack in 2 hours or 3 hours.
Hard.
And television doesn't have that limitation, and comics doesn't have that limitation, novels don't have that limitation, and video games don't have that limitation. And so it almost feels right now like my least favorite genre.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you.
Is film.
Yeah.
Because it is so limiting compared to what Star Wars does in all of the other formats. Yeah. And so I'm a little more forgiving of the film because I realize that you're trying to pack all of this
it's hard to.
in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it's hard to do that.
It's very difficult.
Well, especially with a universe like Star Wars that is so massive with so many different characters and species and planets and locations and is a lot, As you can tell, this is going on almost 50 years now. So it's to be expected. I agree. As I've gotten older, I've always loved Star Wars, and of course I started with the movies like most people, but the comics, the novels, the animated shows, those are really my bread and butter of Star Wars. And I do occasionally will pop on a movie for background noise or just because I haven't seen it in a while, I want to check it out. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to.
Bad Batch made it into my Christmas letter this year.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's how good it is.
I mean, my tattoos.
It made it into my Christmas letter.
My tattoos are characters from TV shows, not movies. So.
Right. My favorite Star Wars character is Ahsoka Tano.
Right.
He's never been on film.
Yet.
So it's really interesting.
Yet.
True. Yet. That's true. That's true. I just remember that I loved this little character, Bulio, at the beginning.
Yeah.
Of the one that gives them the message. Yeah. And I love his line, "Win the war."
Yeah. How can we repay you? Win the war.
Win the war.
Fun fact: voiced by Mark Hamill. So.
Really?
Voiced by Mark Hamill, yes. Is in the credits. I saw it.
Oh, what fun.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a voice actor.
Yeah, he's very. That's probably more. He's more famous for voice acting almost than anything else at this point. But
well, he's Luke Skywalker, and then all his voice.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot. I forgot he's Luke Skywalker. How could I forget?
He's Luke Skywalker.
I forgot. That's a little big. It's a big role he played. Yeah.
Any final thoughts? We're
getting a little long today, but that's okay.
No, that's good. That's good.
It's good discussion. Our discussion makes me appreciate this movie a lot more. Still don't know if I, like I said, would rank it that high. It's probably towards the bottom still, to be honest with you. But I appreciate it, and I think we've gotten ancillary media that's helped improve this film and the sequels as a whole. And I hope we continue to get more stuff in this era because I want to see more of these characters. Yeah. And I think while the story of the sequels, we really didn't get into a whole lot, but the story of the sequels is not my favorite per se. I think the characters I love. I adore the characters a lot. I think they're great. All the acting is fantastic, and I just hope we get to see them more. And I hope in the Rey film we get to see our beloved trio of this sequel trilogy team up again and go on another fun adventure. Maybe so.
I You know, it's funny that you say that because I prefer the sequel trilogy to the prequel trilogy
I do too, personally.
by leaps and bounds. By leaps and bounds. It speaks to me a little more directly. I think because the prequel trilogy is so focused on one character
Mm-hmm.
that I really like how the sequel trilogy sort of spins out into all these different characters. And I'm completely turned.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, guys, I am completely turned by the sequel trilogy.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I'm with you.
It just every time I watch them, I'm just sort of like, no, I love these movies.
Yeah.
I really
Oh,
do.
I do too.
I really do. So,
You know,
well, thank you for providing this idea of making this
yeah,
podcast because we have been busy this fall and we haven't been able to do what we usually do. And I'm about to fly to Taiwan and
yeah,
teach Star Wars in Asia.
that's going to be so much fun
This is a little farewell podcast
for the
episode. I'm very excited
year.
that we did this. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Nick.
And we will.
Thank you, audience, for listening. So
Oh,
sorry.
it's okay.
Yeah,
I was going to say, just remember, like and subscribe on YouTube.
please,
Follow us on Spotify
please.
if that's your way of listening. Interact with us. I would love to see comments if y'all have thoughts on this movie, or tell us your favorite part of the movie. Tell us who you loved, what you didn't love. Keep it civil as always, but love some more feedback. And Carmelo is not going to be gone forever. He's just temporarily leaving us. He will pop back in and do some more episodes, and then hopefully we'll have a normal-ish season next year when we have a full clean slate.
And we're hoping to do a Skeleton Crew
Yes. Oh, yes.
review when it's over. So I will be in Taiwan at that time, but we'll survive the 14 hours ahead.
We will.
We'll make
the
it
time
work.
difference
We'll
will not affect us. We'll make it happen. So
everybody have wonderful holidays, and let's all survive 2025
and beyond. Yes,
that's all I have to say.
And beyond.
May the force be with us all. Yes. May the force be with us all.
Bye, guys.
Bye.